The Swords of King Arthur. In the old world, when England was a wild and dark place, adventure and danger, good magic and evil spells were waiting everywhere. On the day Prince Arthur was born, his father, the good King Pendragon, laid the baby in the arms of Merlin the magician and said, "My son and I have many dangerous enemies. Take him and hide him in the home of a good knight who will love him and bring him up to be a good and honorable man. And when he's old enough, Merlin, please help him to take his rightful place as king." And so Arthur grew up in the home of Sir Hector and never knew he was a prince. 16 years passed, and the old king died. Then one day, in the shadow of Canterbury Cathedral, there appeared a massive marble stone. No one knew who had brought it there. Through the stone was a sword sunk as deep as if a giant had driven it in, and round the base were the words, "Whosoever draws this sword is the true King of England." Everyone tried, but the strongest man in the land could not so much as move the sword. Arthur, who was only 16, laid his hands on the hilt and drew out the blade as if it were a knife wedged in butter. Only then did Merlin show himself to Arthur and to the astonished crowds. "Take the throne, Arthur, and rule wisely and well." "But Merlin, sir, I'm only a boy. How can I be King of England?" begged Arthur. "You are Prince Arthur, son of Pendragon, and it is written in the stars that you will be the greatest king of all." As soon as Arthur had been crowned, Merlin's magic and wisdom protected him. The ageless magician taught the boy the language of the animals, the healing power of herbs, and the skills of battle. The people began to say, "Arthur may be only 16, but he's a good king, the best we remember, the best England has ever had." Heroes and knights flocked to his court at Camelot. Arthur ordered a huge table to be placed in the great hall. There he sat and discussed the affairs of England with his knights of the Round Table. And because the table was round, no one felt more important or less important than anyone else. Not even the king had a place of honor. The knights of the Round Table swore to help the weak and to drive all manner of evil out of the land. One day, as Arthur and his men rode out from his castle, they met a young knight so badly wounded that he seemed likely to tumble off his horse. "What's this?" said Arthur. "Who did this to you, sir?" "My name is Griflet. I come from fighting Pellinore the giant. He set up his tent in the river gorge and says no one may pass without fighting him. He's so strong, my lord king," said the knight. "Stay away from him, I beg you." "No, by my sword, I won't. I'll be revenged on him for the hurt he's done you, Griflet. Men, cover my shield and take the crown off my helmet. I'll fight Pellinore alone, and he'll never know he's fighting the king." Riding to the river gorge, Arthur saw a pavilion ahead. Beside it grew a tree, and on one branch hung an enormous shield. Arthur banged on it with his sword. "Who goes there?" boomed a gigantic voice. Out rushed the tallest knight Arthur had ever seen, brandishing a huge lance. "I forbid you to pass!" "No man forbids me!" cried Arthur. "Then we'll fight!" Pellinore mounted, and they rode at each other. 3 times they charged. 3 times Arthur's lance gouged into the giant's shield. But at the 3rd charge, Arthur was flung from his horse. He got up and drew his sword. Pellinore did the same, secretly admiring this brave young knight whose shield bore no crest. Their swords clashed again and again. The king weakened, and Pellinore drove him backwards against the stump of a tree. Arthur tripped, and as he fell, Pellinore slashed at Arthur's sword with such fury that he smashed it to pieces.
"Kneel and beg for mercy,"
cried Pellinore.
"Never! I'd rather die."
"Then die. But before I kill you, let me see your face, for you fought bravely." Pellinore tore off Arthur's helmet and looked into his face. But he did not recognize the newly crowned king. He raised his sword to strike.
"Stay your hand!"
Someone stepped out from the trees. It was Merlin the magician, Arthur's own teacher. Pellinore recognized Merlin at once. After all, the old man had been famous throughout England for 100 years.
"Would you kill the King of
England?" Merlin demanded. Pellinore stared in horror. Then, in desperation, he said,
"If this is the king, I must kill him, or he will have me killed when he gets back to Camelot."
But as Pellinore's sword began to fall, Merlin pointed a long finger at the knight. His magic struck like a thunderbolt. Pellinore dropped to the grass and lay as still as a dead man. Arthur struggled to his feet.
"You should not have killed him, Merlin. He beat me in a fair fight."
Merlin put an arm round Arthur's shoulders. "He's not dead, my boy, just sleeping. And you won't send your knights to kill him, will you?" Arthur sighed and shook his head. "No, but oh, Merlin, the sword I pulled from the magic stone is smashed to pieces." Merlin only smiled. "Then we had better pay a visit to the Lady of the Lake." He led Arthur along a winding path which led to a peaceful lake. It seemed deserted. Suddenly, an arm clothed in white silk appeared out of the waters of the lake. In its hand was a sword in a scabbard, and the hilt was studded with jewels. "Whose sword is that?" whispered Arthur. "It can be yours if you choose, though one day you must give it back to the Lady of the Lake. It is her hand you see before you." When they had rowed out to the heart of the dark waters, Arthur leant out and took the sword from the pale hand of the Lady of the Lake. As soon as he grasped it, the arm slipped out of sight. Back on the shore, Merlin said, "The sword has magic power. It will help you to conquer your enemies, but the scabbard is just as wonderful. While you wear it, you will never lose one drop of blood, no matter how badly you are wounded." "Then I'll wear it always, and the sword I shall call by name Excalibur." As Arthur and Merlin rode away together, an echo rose from the reed-fringed lake. "Excalibur! Excalibur! Excalibur!" The Treachery of Morgan. Armed with the magical sword Excalibur, King Arthur drove many invaders and evil knights out of England. But he had one enemy, more deadly than all the rest. Not an invading king or a murderous knight, but his own beautiful half-sister, Morgan Le Fay. Morgan was a sorceress, and her black magic was every bit as strong as the good magic of Merlin the magician. She hated Arthur for fighting evil, and she hated Excalibur, the sword which made Arthur strong in battle and whose scabbard protected him from injury. One day, Arthur was riding out from Camelot with one of the knights of the Round Table, a Frenchman called Sir Accolon. "I shall show you the place where I received Excalibur from the Lady of the Lake," said Arthur, as their horses threaded their way down a tangled path to the shores of a lake. But is this the same place? Arthur wondered, for the lake seemed strangely different. Moored at the end of a crumbling jetty lay a huge black ship. A veiled woman stood on the bow, beckoning to them through the lakeside mists, as if to say, "Welcome, come aboard." Surprised and intrigued, the two men boarded the ship, and there they found a banquet waiting. "Were you expecting us?" asked Arthur, as the woman ushered them to the table. "Where are your crew? Where have you sailed from?" But their hostess neither spoke nor lifted her veil. Instead, she poured wine for them and filled their plates with the most delicious food. Two hammocks hung at the end of the cabin, and after Accolon and Arthur had eaten, all they wanted was to climb into them and rest. The boat rocked. The hammocks swung. Both knights were asleep before the lakeside birds stopped singing. When the morning sun shone in his face, Sir Accolon yawned and opened his eyes. He was lying in a walled garden, and a servant was offering him a sword. "Get up at once, Sir Accolon! King Arthur bids you fight the evil white knight who is waiting in the great hall." Sir Accolon shook his head sleepily. "Look!" cried the servant urgently. "He has sent me to you with his magic sword, Excalibur. With this you'll destroy the white knight in a twinkling." "Oh, I'll put my armor on," said Sir Accolon. "Tell the white knight I shall fight him within the hour." Meanwhile, Arthur woke up and found himself not on the ship, nor in the walled garden, but chained up in a dungeon. A woman's voice shouted through the door, "Get up! Get up, Arthur, so-called king! To win your freedom, you must fight the Red Knight who's waiting in the great hall." Arthur's hand went to his side. He sighed with relief. "Thank goodness. Whoever locked me up here has left me my magic sword, Excalibur." He called out, "Very well. If I must fight, I shall." Within the hour, King Arthur had put on armor and climbed the stone stairs of the strange castle. His face was hidden by the visor of his helmet. So, too, was his opponent's face hidden as they met in the great hall. How could he know that the Red Knight was really Sir Accolon? And how could Sir Accolon know that the White Knight was his friend and king? Only Morgan Le Fay, who had provided the meal aboard the black ship, knew that the true Excalibur hung at Accolon's waist, and that the sword by Arthur's side was an imitation without any magic. Around the room were long trestle tables, and the people seated at them watched the fight as if it were a sport to entertain them. With every clash of shields, the crowd gasped. With each swish and slash of swords, they expected to see one knight fall dead. Tables were overturned. Wine spilled onto the floor. In Sir Accolon's hand, Excalibur tore open Arthur's armor as if it were paper. Arthur's useless sword glanced off Accolon's armor. "My magic has left me!" cried Arthur.
This is not Excalibur. I cannot fight, and I am not protected from hurt. This Red Knight has my sword and is killing me with it.
As he prepared to face death at the hands of the strange Red Knight, something caught Arthur's eye. Out onto the minstrel's gallery stepped an old man, tall and grey-haired. It was Merlin the magician. Merlin raised his gnarled old hand, knotted with purple veins. Suddenly, Sir Accolon's sword snaked and twisted out of his grip. Arthur sprang forward, seized the sword, and lunged. As Accolon fell, Arthur pulled off his helmet.
No! Accolon, my friend! Who has done this?
He whispered.
Who has made me fight one of my own knights?
Then, clutching his beloved sword, he fell to the ground, weakened by his many wounds. Merlin took Arthur to a convent where the nuns nursed him day and night. But so many were his wounds that they could not have saved his life but for Excalibur. In his right hand he held the sword by its jeweled hilt, and in his left he held the scabbard whose healing magic, little by little, made him well. He must have complete rest and quiet, said Merlin as he left the convent. Let no one visit him. The nuns promised they would not. But when a beautiful and gentle-looking woman called one day and begged to visit Arthur, they could see no harm. Please say yes, pleaded the visitor. Arthur is my brother, after all. And so, the scheming and envious Morgan Le Fay was shown into the bedroom where Arthur lay sleeping. His right hand was closed tight around the sword hilt, but the scabbard had slipped out of his other hand and lay on the pillow. Quickly, Morgan slipped it inside her cloak and hurried away. The sound of her horse galloping away woke Arthur, and he reached out to touch the scabbard which protected him from harm. It was gone.
Stolen!
He cried.
Somebody saddle me a horse! I must go after the thief!
But your majesty, exclaimed the nuns, no one has been here except your sister, Morgan. Realizing the truth, Arthur rode after his treacherous sister, vowing to kill her for the evil trick she had played on him and on Accolon. His horse was fast, and he gained on Morgan with every mile. She left the cart track and rode to the edge of a swampy lake. Taking the scabbard from under her cloak, she flung it into the oozing mud, where it sank out of sight. Never again shall my brother be protected from his injuries. And all the beauty went out of her face forever. Closer and closer came Arthur, but Morgan the sorceress only swirled her cloak around her head and turned herself and her horse into a white bluff of rock. Arthur glanced at it as he rode past, but galloped on. And when, after many days, he had not found his sister, he rode home sadly to Camelot. But he vowed revenge, and swore that one day he would overcome the evil magic of Morgan Le Fay. Arthur gives back his sword. The days of the Knights of the Round Table are over now. The heroic days when brave knights rode out to do battle with giants and tyrants, and when Arthur wore his magic sword, Excalibur. They have all gone. Arthur and the knights and Excalibur. They fell like leaves in winter. but their story still stands like a tall tree with many branches. When Arthur set sail for France to fight in the wars, he left England in the care of his nephew, Sir Mordred. Poor, weak Mordred. He had never tasted such power. He tried on the crown of England, and he sat in Arthur's seat at the Round Table. And he said to himself, "It's good to sit in the place of the king, but how much better it would be if I owned his crown, and his chair, and his castles." He gathered an army made up of all the worthless knights Arthur had banished or imprisoned. And the treacherous Morgan Le Fay, half-sister to the king, brought her black knights out of the land of blood to fight alongside Mordred. The news reached France, and Arthur sailed home as fast as he could to do battle with Mordred and his sworn enemy, Morgan Le Fay. It was a terrible and terrifying battle. Good knights and bad took each other's lives with sword and lance, mace and axe. Every one of Mordred's men was killed. Morgan, the sorceress, seeing that the battle could not be won, fled the field and lived alone in her realm of blood till both she and her magic withered and died. At last, no one on the battlefield was left alive but Sir Mordred, Arthur, and one young knight of the Round Table, the bold Sir Bedivere. Mordred hammered at Arthur with his broadsword, but every blow from the king's magic sword Excalibur sliced open Mordred's shield. Arthur's shout rose above the clatter of weapons. "Die, you traitor! Excalibur is sharper than any sword that was ever drawn in battle!" Mordred dropped on one knee. "Ah, but where is the magic scabbard to protect you from hurt? Didn't your own sister steal it from you? Isn't it lost forever in the black ooze of a bog?" And jabbing one last time with his sword, he stabbed Arthur in the heart. As he did so, he fell with his face to the ground and died. Seeing the king stagger, Sir Bedivere ran to him across the battlefield and caught him in his arms. "Ah, find Merlin, my lord. He'll make you well again," sobbed the young knight. "No, boy," said Arthur. "I'm weary. I've done my work. All the bad knights in England are dead, and you are left alive to tell my story. I'm ready to sleep now. But I do have one last command for you. Take me away from this terrible place." He pointed to a narrow path. It was getting dark. Bedivere gently carried the king along the path. It led to a ruined church overlooking a lake that shone in the moonlight. "This is no place for a wounded king," whispered Sir Bedivere. "You need a clean bed to lie in." But Arthur asked to sit in the shelter of the ruins, and he unbuckled Excalibur from round his waist. "Take this sword of mine, Bedivere. I've done with it. Take it down to the lake and throw it in." Throw Excalibur into the lake? The young knight was horrified. "The king doesn't know what he's saying," he thought. "He'll regret this when he gets well again." So he took the sword down to the lake, but instead of throwing it into the glittering water, he hid it among the roots of a tree. When he returned, the king said, "Well, did you throw it in?" "I did, sir." "And what happened?" "Happened, sir? Nothing happened. The wind blew through the reeds and a few frogs croaked." In spite of his wounds, the king shouted, "You disobedient
obeyed me. You didn't throw it.
He tried to get to his feet, but he was too weak.
Go back and throw that sword into the lake, boy. Do as I tell you.
Sir Bedivere ran back to the tree and pulled out Excalibur. It was such a beautiful sword. The hilt was full of jewels, and the moonlight spun off them like sparks. He whirled the sword once round his head, but could not bring himself to let go. So he hid it under a bush and went back. "Well," asked the king eagerly,
"What happened?"
"I threw it in, sir. It made a great splash, and the nightingales stopped singing."
"Liar! Traitor!" choked Arthur. "Have I only one knight left, and he a liar who refuses to obey me? Must I go myself?"
Sir Bedivere could not speak for bitter remorse. He ran back as fast as his legs would carry him, snatched up Excalibur, and hurled it far out into the lake. At the very moment its hilt touched the water, a woman's arm, clothed in white silk, reached up out of the lake and caught it. 3 times the hand brandished the sword, then it was drawn below the waves, and it was as if it had never been. Breathless with amazement, Sir Bedivere ran back to King Arthur and told him what he had seen. Arthur smiled and touched the boy's hair. "You have done well. Excalibur was not mine, you see. It was only lent to me by the Lady of the Lake. Now, carry me down to the shore." Bedivere lifted him one last time, but reaching the lake, found it no longer deserted. Moored among the reeds was a shallow barge draped at bow, masthead, and stern with black cloth. 3 women, veiled and dressed in black, stood on the shore beckoning. "Lay him in the boat, Sir Bedivere. Your task is finished." Wrapped in rugs, in the bow of the barge, King Arthur seemed to be sleeping. As Bedivere stepped out of the barge, it pulled away from the shore and into the heart of the lake, where mists draped it round. "Where are you taking him?" Bedivere called across the water, and the answer came back. "To Avalon. To Avalon." And that was the last any mortal saw of the king. The greatest knight ever to wear armor. The greatest hero ever to draw sword. People say that Arthur is not dead, that the herbs of Avalon healed him, and he is sleeping, worn out after all his battles. They say that if the country is in danger and needs its best warriors, Arthur and his fallen knights may come back someday from the magic vale called Avalon.